So can you let us know in a little bit deeper details about the overall challenges that you see specifically in emerging markets and how you characterize them in terms of the supply and demand?
So what's interesting is that in rural economies you find that about 20% of populations
you said rural economy. It is economy by itself.
It is an economy by itself. And in a typical sub-Saharan country, you might have a situation where 20% of the population actually spread over 70% of the land area. So that itself induces a challenge in terms of covering that level of population across such a large swathe of territory. When we looked at the supply side, we looked at the infrastructure, which was not just about towers, it was also about backhaul, it was also about spectrum actually being available in order to enable that kind of coverage to occur. An interesting point, over the last 5 years or so, what we've seen is only about 1 in 5 spectrum assignments worldwide have been in the coverage band that's below 1 gigahertz.
You mean the low band?
The low bands, and a lot of the 4 out of 5 have been in the capacity bands, which are obviously the higher end bands in order to densify coverage in urban areas. So that itself shows you the kind of balance.
Elaborate more on what is it that the government need to do and what are the GSMA opinion in terms of the government role in the rural coverage and emerging market in general?
So this is an interesting one. I think we recently released a mobile economy report for sub-Saharan Africa, which looked at one key area for governments to address, which is sector-specific taxation. And clearly, taxation is a burden that needs to be looked at very closely, particularly for the telecom sector. Because this is a sector where there is a lot of upfront investment from operators in order to ensure coverage for the population. You have obviously money that's put up first for spectrum, then you have investment in terms of capex for sites, capex for the network, and you have to then collect it back over a number of years.
And you have to operate it as well.
Of course, and you have the operational costs of running that. Now, what we have done is we've done a lot of studies in sub-Saharan Africa with multiple countries where we've seen that reducing the burden on taxes actually helps the improvement in terms of mobile broadband. This is not a short-term game where you see some financial uplift by simply taxing the sector up front, but you need to look at what is the overall uplift to the GDP of the economy when the mobile sector is allowed to thrive, when
and even the overall country ICT in general.
Course. And we have seen multiple studies that go back to the start of the decade where a 10% increase in mobile penetration or mobile broadband access actually converts to an uplift between 1 and 2% in terms of GDP growth. And these are empirical studies, and governments would be well done to actually look into these studies and think about their planning. The other thing that governments can also help to do is have a holistic approach, particularly in rural economies, in terms of how they facilitate the rollout of networks. You can become more efficient by ensuring, for example, when you're running backhaul, which is a huge expense in rural economies, when you're running backhaul, to try and plan that together with the rollout of, say, other infrastructure like roads, like utilities. And helping to work together with the operators, together with the tower companies.
Yes, all the stakeholders actually.
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect, yeah. So the last thing I wanted to also touch on, because you mentioned spectrum, and I believe also spectrum is the lifeblood for our industry.
It is.
And the government also, and regulatories in general, need to have an action on the spectrum. Your views on that?
So we as a GSMA have been advocating for more spectrum to be set aside for mobile, particularly particularly low band spectrum. And we've done a lot of work with many governments. We've done a lot of work with the World Radio Conference, WRC. What the fruits of our efforts over the past 10 years or so have really been, providing us, more spectrum in the digital dividend plan. And you have several countries today that have actually set aside low band 700 megahertz on the digital mid-dividend space to be set aside for mobile. There's a lot more to be done, but I think that governments are hearing our message. We're working very closely with them in order to expound upon the advantages of having low band spectrum being set aside for populations for mobile communications.